Hi, I'm Ray Poynter, and I'm joined by Leigh Caldwell, founder of Irrational Agency. Hi, Leigh.
Hi, Ray. Great to chat with you. Good to see you again after, I think it must be over a year since we had our last narrative research conversation. Yeah, great to be back.
Thanks. Since it's been over a year, and as a refresher, can you remind the audience how you would define narrative research?
Yeah, absolutely. So narrative research is, as you might guess, all about stories. It's research that's based on the insight that people reveal lots more about themselves in stories than they do in many other forms of communication. They reveal their values, they reveal the way they see the world, they reveal the choices that they would make in different situations, even in hypothetical situations that they haven't been in, through storytelling. But it's a little more than just getting stories from people. It's also about the idea that narratives have got a particular structure to them, and that when people tell a story, they naturally fit into that structure. And we'll all recognize these structures from Hollywood, from films, from books that we read. The idea that you start at the beginning with a character that's in a kind of stasis or an old world. Something happens to shake them out of that state. Generally, they then have an objective that they want to pursue, or some kind of problem that they have to solve, and the story unfolds with them attempting to solve the problem, facing some obstacles, usually not quite getting it right first time, and ultimately getting to that goal and solving that problem. And even if you tell me a story about your anniversary last year, or if you tell me a story about when you went to a cafe and bought a cappuccino and they spilled it all over your t-shirt, you're probably going to follow that structure, those tropes, because we're really programmed to speak about stories in that way. And that gives us a very powerful set of analytic tools that we can use to dive into the way people are telling stories, what they're revealing by doing so, and analyze them in a very structured manner, and get to those real truths that people reveal, as in a lot of the best research, truths that people reveal without necessarily knowing that they're doing so.
So perhaps we could get a bit more clarity if we add in what sort of problems or challenges is it good at addressing?
Yeah. Well, narratives are particularly strong when you are talking about a situation that people might not be intimately familiar with. So it's something that's relatively new. So let's say that you're exploring how people might act in a new category that they are not very familiar with, or indeed a new category that you as a company or a business are thinking of going into. And so exploring new innovations and unfamiliar territories like that. It's also very powerful at language, because the language people use when they're telling a story is their own natural vocabulary, their own way of communicating, the words they would use talking to their friends. And so if you're trying to pin down the right messaging or the right words to use in a concept or copywriting or a campaign, then it's really good for that. In a sense, the way we see it as the purpose of stories in people's minds are to plan actions before people take them. And so when they're encountering something new, something that they're having to figure out, they're going to make that kind of plan through an internal storytelling process. They'll tell themselves a story. So, there are other areas where that doesn't happen. For example, if I go to the supermarket and buy my daily pint of milk, I most likely know what supermarket I'm going to, because I go there every day. I know what I'm going to buy because it's the same product. It's very habit driven. And that's an example where narratives don't have as much of a role to play. But anything that's either unfamiliar, new, is about changing people's behavior, or that's about language. These are the real strengths for narratives.
Great. Now, you've been doing this for a while, but obviously AI is now on the scene. So how have you, or do you expect to be using AI to enhance, conduct, accelerate narrative research?
Yeah, well, so there's a couple of really great ways in which it is starting to help us out. So we, as you say, we've been doing this for a while, since about 2018, so 7 years now. And we launched a methodology then called System 3, which was an extension to, everyone will probably have heard about System 1 and 2, the divisions of the brain into unconscious versus more rational. And we saw System 3 as a third space in the brain that was about imagination and storytelling. And at the time, there wasn't any AI. So if we wanted to go and get people, let's say we get 1,000 people to tell us a story about how they drink soft drinks or the holiday that they would like to take next year, it was very difficult to analyze those stories. If we just took 1,000 natural language stories, yeah, you can look for themes, you can look for keywords and so on, or you can code them manually. These are some of the things we did. We ended up developing a kind of structured word association process where you would give somebody a prompt and then bring up a grid of words that they could pick from to say which of these words represents, as it were, the next chapter in my story. And that works pretty well, but it's not quite as natural an interface for people as simply maybe leaving a voice note saying, here's what happened to me last week, or here's what I imagine is going to be what the next year is going to look like. So AI allows us to analyze those thousands of stories in people's natural language, but still to apply that structured approach. So that kind of arc that I mentioned of character and problem and obstacle and resolution, AI is very good at parsing a story into those pieces and telling us, okay, here are the starting points, here are the contexts in which people see this story starting, and that gives you, for example, a category entry point. Then here are the obstacles that people are facing across all of those 1,000 stories, and those can tell you the pains and problems that consumers have. And here are the solutions that they're finding, and here are why they pick those solutions, which could tell you what are the products that they best see as a fit and a solution for those problems, but also what are the reasons. Why is it that those products solve their problems, all of which could be very valuable information for a brand. And AI has allowed us to start to be able to analyze those stories at real scale. And not, I think it is important to say, of course, lots of people are using AI to parse large amounts of open-ended answers and text, but because we have that structured approach, there's a lot of very powerful and specific actionable details that come out. And one of the reasons that AI is good at that is AI is trained on stories. AI is trained on the text that it has found on the internet, and lots of that text is in the form of stories and people expressing themselves in that very natural way. So it's almost like it's a native environment for AI to play in the world of narrative research. So
just to dig a little bit more deeply into that, what are the various things you're doing to integrate the AI into those processes?
Okay, the most obvious is that idea that we're taking the inputs and using AI to do the structured analysis. So you could think about it like the way you would do an analysis grid in qual research, but at a human level, you can probably really do that for 10, 20, 30, maybe 50 interviews. You can't really do it for 1,000 or 10,000. So it's of course scaling up that capability to analyze in a structured way. There's a couple of nice uses that we're seeing for AI at the end of the process as well. So when we've got these stories, we've got these common elements. Maybe we've segmented the stories that we have into different personas, the types of stories that different people tell, and we can build essentially AI versions of those segments that can tell their own story. So I can we did one recently with pharmacists. So I can speak to a pharmacist who is, who's animated by an LLM, and say, tell me about the people who would typically come in for a treatment for this condition, or what are the problems that people talk to you about when they come in for this for this type of treatment. And that will, again, it's a very natural way. It's a way that AI is good at translating one set of stories into another, because that's the nature of what an LLM does. So you're able to extrapolate quite well from the input data, which is the data you've collected, into the business questions that you might want to answer. There's another more subtle one, which is in the data collection stage. So when you're asking people to tell you a story, sometimes, and we know the pressure that respondents are often under to earn a small amount of money from a survey, and they want to do it as quickly as possible. So everyone knows that when you ask open-end questions, you sometimes get very abbreviated, short answers. If you've got an AI built into your survey platform, you're able to detect that in real time and say, actually, can you tell me a bit more about that? Or, okay, you've said that, if I said, tell you a story about when you went to the cafe and got yourself a drink, and the person responds, I went to Cafe Nero and bought myself an Americano. That, I could respond and say, well, tell me more. You haven't really got to the heart of the story there, have you? What was it you really wanted? Was that your first choice? Did anything happen? Was it good or bad? How did it feel? You can prompt, because you don't have to. Well, we used to do this by listing kind of all 7 stages in the story and saying, tell me what your objective was, tell me what obstacles you faced, tell me what solutions you found, which worked up to a point. But again, it's not natural. It's not letting people express themselves freely, and so the AI can kind of have that conversation with people and prompt them and draw things out. So it's kind of data collection, analysis, and then at the delivery stage to the client, it has a role all along. And I think that very nice fit between how stories work and what LLMs do is a really powerful one. Has made it quite natural to be able to build those capabilities.
Great. So just picking up on what you were saying there about the virtual pharmacist, how might narrative inform the creation of synthetic personas, synthetic data, and so on?
Well, I think so. You mean it's probably two different questions. So synthetic data, I guess, you're looking at if you haven't got the real people to speak to, and you're looking to try and reach out to or you administer a survey to a population of virtual respondents. And I think this is something we haven't done as much of. But for me, I think the place the opportunity there is to get those synthetic respondents to behave and answer questions in a more natural way, in a way that is reflective of the people that they are representing. There's a big question statistically that the industry hasn't really answered yet, I think, about that type of synthetic data, which is there a good correlation between the answers people have given or the information they've provided in other contexts, answering other questions, to the questions that you want to ask. So let's say that I'm, in this example with the pharmacists, let's say that I want to survey 200 pharmacists, and it's quite hard to reach 200 pharmacists, as we have found when we've gone out to do the surveys. So if I want to say to them, how often does somebody come in to ask for this type of treatment? Let's say it's headache pills, so ibuprofen. How often does someone come in to ask for ibuprofen? Now, the synthetic respondents that I'm asking that to, what are the chances that they know that? What are the chances that the panel has already asked a bunch of pharmacists about ibuprofen? It's not that high. So the synthetic respondents are trying to construct a response based on other things that we know about them. And this is where one of the big questions arises for that type of technology. How well can I predict the answer to this question about ibuprofen from whatever other data it's been sourced from? So if you've gone into Claude or ChatGPT and said, make me 200 synthetic pharmacists, will they have enough meaningful information to answer that question, or will they kind of just make it up? So there's a big risk and I think a really big unknown in the area of synthetic respondents. Synthetic personas, on the other hand, are based on real data. So they're based on data that has been collected from real humans. The synthetic part is just putting them together in a way that allows them to answer questions more naturally. So what, in a way, the synthetic respondent, the synthetic data is replacing the respondent. The synthetic pharmacist is actually replacing the researcher. It's so that when our client comes to us and says, oh, by the way, what can you tell me the age profile of the people the patients who come into these pharmacies? We, rather than us having to go and dig up our data and like look through the transcripts and try and figure out how much we know about that, we just ask the synthetic pharmacist, and the AI will be able to answer that question. Or if you've got it right, it will tell you when it doesn't know. Of course, that's the other big risk of AI, is that it will just invent the answer. So having that built-in humility and ability to say I don't know is really important. So I do think there may be a role for narratives in that dilemma about the synthetic respondent dilemma. Can I, as it were, take a story that the pharmacist has told me and extrapolate based on the structure of that story and what it reveals, extrapolate what would happen in the next chapter if the next chapter was someone coming in and asking for ibuprofen? Maybe there's something in there about that allows us to create better predictability, or maybe that's just a problem that's actually not really soluble by the tools we have. But in terms of the personas, narratives are really great at both translating the client's question into something that AI can genuinely answer, and then having meaningful source data that it can draw upon to answer that question, because we've gone out and got the stories from the pharmacist, and so telling that story in a new form to the client is relatively easy.
Great. Now that raises in there one of the risks potentially in this area of using AI, but are there any dangers in the interaction of narrative and artificial intelligence?
I think one of the dangers is almost that stories can be too convincing. It's there's good research about the way that people believe and remember stories. So if you give people information in a story form, and you'll know this because I know that you do your storytelling from data workshops, and you train people to use stories, which is another like step in the chain, is the researcher telling their stakeholders a story based on the data. And you rightly say they'll believe the story, they'll believe it more if you put it in story form. They'll remember it rather than having a chart of data or a bar graph. And as researchers, we have to be responsible when we're telling those stories, because if they're too good, then they can be a little dangerous. And we've all had a stakeholder watch a focus group and pick on one thing that one respondent said. Is like, oh, but Carol said this. And they never shut up about it. And it's great that they're remembering the research, but they get obsessed with the one thing that Carol said, and it's not as fully representative. So they may end up in a very niche area or going down a tunnel because of a powerful anecdote that they heard in a focus group. And AI, because it is so text and story driven, runs the risk of the same those same dangers. And this is kind of in a way where the idea of hallucination comes from in AI. So I mentioned system 1, 2, and 3, and I think that LLMs in a way are a very good example of system 3. But what system in the human brain, what system 3 has to keep it in check is system 2. So you've got, your system 1 is sort of doing the basic stuff like helping you breathe and letting you feel some emotions. System 3 is the daydreaming, the imagination, the planning, the what might I do tomorrow, what might I do with my career. And then system 2 is kicking in to say, wait a minute, you probably can't be an airline pilot if you're 53 and you've never flown a plane, and you need very focused. The system 2 will like keep your imagination in check, and one of the dangers with AI is we don't have as good a system 2 as we have a system 3. So the AIs have brilliant imagination. They can piece together these things in incredibly convincing ways, and they will indeed convince themselves that the answer is right, or at least right enough to tell you. And humans need that system 2 to evaluate their level of confidence, the probability that what they're saying is correct. And does it follow the logical rules? Does it have a contradiction in it? All of these things are what our brains monitor on our behalf. And so, yeah, it's because that storytelling thread so powerfully runs through where AI gets its data from, how you talk to it, how it does its reasoning, so to speak, its calculations. The danger is that the story becomes too powerful, and that the AI and we then fall for it without fully critically evaluating it.
Great. So we're pretty much running into the time buffers, but if all of this is new to people, how can they start getting into narrative research?
Well, we have put together a little PDF, which we will link to the webpage here. I think I'll give it to you, Ray, or we may have given it to you already. But if you can link that to the page, people will be able to download it from there, and that will give you a little background primer, some links to where you can learn more from. There's some academic research about it. There's our blog. There's links in there to the people who have presented to date, and it will give you a little sense of here are a few ways in which it can be applied. But of course, you're also very welcome to get in touch with me, connect with me on LinkedIn if you like, or drop me an email, lee@irrationalagency.com, and we can have a chat. There's lots to talk about. There are a couple of books and articles out there that will give you a nice primer. But very happy to chat with anyone who's got questions.
Fantastic. So let's switch to live Q&A.
All right. Look forward to talking to a few of you there.
So thanks, Leigh.
Very welcome, Ray.
And we've got a couple of questions already. So if anybody else wants to type more in, that's great. What specific analytic frameworks do you use to structure code and validate narratives?
So you may have seen a diagram that Leila shared in her presentation, which had those, I think, 7 stages of a story. And there's actually a lot of theoretical work around story structure and narrative structure. You'll see a book called The Science of Storytelling, a book called Into the Woods. I think these are by Will Storr and John York, going back all the way to The Hero's Journey from Joseph Campbell, who was an anthropologist who studied myth making around the world. And there are different angles, and there are these different sources don't all present an exactly consistent picture, but broadly speaking, there is a certain amount of commonality around how stories evolve, what the main elements are, that they generally have a need or a tension or a conflict that drives them. They generally have ups and downs, which are the successes and failures along the way, and they have a resolution which can be positive or negative. You'll see, in fact, another book called The 7 Basic Plots will tell you the key kind of variations of what does a comedy look like, what does a tragedy look like, what does a journey and return look like, and there are these structures that they are all around the oscillating positives and negatives that somebody faces during a story. So we've kind of unified that into a framework of our own that looks at in those diagrams that Leila and Danica shared, the positives and negatives. So the highs and lows are represented by the different colors in those charts. The journey is represented by the connections between the nodes in that chart. And so we're essentially looking for those archetypal story elements. One thing that Ray, you and I had discussed offline was the question of whether those same story archetypes apply universally. Are they different by culture? And there are, for example, there's a story structure often used in Japan and China that is a little less conflict driven, and it's more about having a shift in perspective during the story. And it's called, I think, Kisho Tenketsu. So that's something where if we're looking at data from other cultures, then we are a little more careful about imposing those Western story structures on it. But there is certainly something universal about storytelling, and it always has these ups and downs. So whenever you're looking for a structure, you're essentially looking for the highs and lows and how people move back and forth between those. So that's a description of the structure. I don't know that has a name particularly for that analytic framework, but that's the way that we do it, and that's what drives our System 3 analysis.
Super. And another question: how do you know when a narrative insight is sufficiently strong to operationalize it in the business? For example, in messaging, product, or segmentation?
Well, that's a very interesting question. I think it's a question that probably all researchers face whenever they have data, whenever they have an insight or a conclusion that they've got from research, is how confident can you be in this? We do have, one of the benefits of the approach is that we are going to quite large scale quantitative data sets. So we'll typically be interviewing 2,000, maybe as many as 4,000 or 6,000 people. So you will find that, let's say, 20% of those people have the same story about the category that they're in. So maybe in the case of the heat pumps, maybe there are 20% of people have a common story about their experience with heat pumps. Is that 20% enough to act? I suppose it depends on the business decision. Sometimes you're looking to understand your audience in segments that may be 20% or 10% of the whole audience. Sometimes you'd rather say, you know what, let's find something that is more universal, something that we think will appeal to 60% of our audience. And often what that means is you're looking for a simpler story. So rather than saying we have 7 or 9 stages in a story that are quite subtle, you might say, actually, we're just looking for a really, really simple story with 3 steps in it. For instance, that I don't know, think of the John Lewis ad. So you've this year's John Lewis ad, you have a son giving a present to his dad. His dad remembers when he was the son's age, and that brings them together and reinforces their relationship with each other. That's a simple story, but it seems to work. John Lewis is very good at telling these stories. So it's probably the wider the impact of the decision you're making on the audience that you're serving, the more you have to distill and simplify the story. If you have got a segmented audience and you're doing tactical targeted marketing or messaging, then you can be a lot more specific and find something that is more tailored to the particular narrative impulses of that audience. And each of these narratives that comes out of a chart like that has, how many people it comes from, the statistical equivalent of the margins of error or the confidence interval. So we have statistical tools that are used on those graphs. That is called, these are called networks or graphs in mathematics. They have statistics behind them that you can use to gauge your confidence in the narratives that come out, and then decide how universal does this insight need to be before I will act on it.
Fantastic. Well, we've cleared all the questions. So thanks for joining us today, Leigh, and thanks for co-hosting and co-setting up this whole event. I think it's been fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks also to my colleague Adam, who's put a lot of the work in behind the scenes. So yeah, I'm sure that many of listeners will hear from me and or Adam as well as the other speakers in the coming months, and look forward to meeting many of you then.
Thanks.